We have a lot to cover today, and um, mostly about revision. And I, I wish that I would have been able to have uh, this lecture on Monday and then just take today off so you had more time to write. But I needed to be able to read enough essays to get a feel for what kinds of things I needed to emphasize. And then I had some conversations in the previous class, and they were really helpful in clarifying. And so I'm going to pause at several moments in our discussion to ask you if you have any questions about what I've covered, but please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions as we go. I think that can be helpful. The questions that you ask and the comments that you provide help make sure that I'm explaining myself adequately and I don't just assume that you know what I'm thinking or what I'm saying. And so you are actually helping the entire class if you ask questions. So I titled this slide, it's kind of a throwback to E. Shelley Reed and her analogy about fruit jello, this idea that if you bring plain jello to people, at a potluck, people go, that was not very interesting. But if you bring a few things of, if you bring a bowls of cherries and then you just dump them out on the table. Sorry, I was reading the chat and that distracted me, but I can see it. I thought I couldn't, but apparently I can. So anyways, this idea of fruit jello, balancing arguments and examples. You have fruit jello, plain jello. Fruit jello kind of ties things together. Make sure that, like you have explanation, but that you have distinct, concrete, point in time examples. That's what your stories are. They're the fruit. And if you just have story, story, story without any analysis, people won't know what your point is. But if you just tell them what to think, then it also won't make sense to them. So a few things that I wanted to say before we move on. Sorry, yes. I'm so distracted. I was so calm. Normally I'm really nervous, and apparently being calm means that I don't know where I'm going. We'll get there. I had a difficulty reading some of your papers. And I know some of you had difficulty reading each other's papers. And so I wanted to talk about how you can arrange your Google Doc to share with your group. And I know you know to say share, and you can type in other people's email addresses, but an easier way to do this is to make it shareable and edit, like so they can edit it without necessarily having to type in email addresses, is you can change the link. So click on down here where it says change link to San Diego State University. And then there's a drop-down menu, and you can put it anyone with the link. Now, I have access to the link, and the people in your group have access to the link, and nobody else is going to see that link. So that's pretty safe. And then you can go over to, it says viewer, and then you change it to editor, and you can actually copy the link and put that into the discussion board. Be sure to click done, and then it puts you back here. I think that's the easiest way to do it. This week, it's really important that you focus on, that you make sure that your link is shareable, because if your link is not shareable, you will not get your shareable and editable, you will not get those 10 points for your initial post. And the people in your group will get credit, but you won't get credit. Also, in your responses, it's essential that you write a paragraph of feedback as well as that you put comments on the page. Now you can decide, do you want a new copy without the initial comments, or do you want to just change around what you've got? You can decide that. The other thing I wanted to remind you is don't forget to write reflections of your writing center visits or your visits with Alyssa. I want to know what it is that you did, what you learned from, like a description of your visits, what you learned, and that goes on the last module. You can find it in assignments and you can find it in the modules. It's the very last one on the sheet. Any questions about that? Okay, make sure that you do those. Those are due, well, the easiest way to do them is to do them immediately after your meeting with Alyssa or at the Writing Center. But definitely that link is going to disappear at the end of the day on October 1st. So that's the drop dead due date. Yeah.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's exactly what you were talking about. I don't know if it's just for me, but I tried clicking on the link to make an appointment with Alyssa. I know we're supposed to meet with her 2 times this month. I tried that last Thursday and it said like it wouldn't give me access to that. So I tried messaging Alyssa about that, but I haven't gotten a response back. And I tried checking again yesterday and it still wouldn't let me access it to make appointments. So I don't know if anybody else has that trouble or if it's just something with me, but.
That happened with me too. It won't let me access, and I haven't gotten a response back either from Alyssa.
Has anybody been, I know that I've seen names on there. Has anybody gotten feedback or been able to access that document?
Yeah. It's like a Google Doc. And I just kept it, like it saves to your Google Doc, so I just go back to it if I want to sign up again.
And Javi, you've been able to access it also?
Yeah, but I think the only reason was because the last time or in the last meeting, Alyssa actually like put the link in the chat and opened it for like that time, and then it's saved from there. Like if I had viewed it afterwards, I don't think, because I tried to do it on another device after that and it said like request access.
Here's my thought. She may have restricted access to people just with SDSU logins. And so like I have 2 Gmail accounts. I have my SDSU Gmail and my regular Gmail. And if I'm primarily logged in with my personal Gmail, I can't open things that require me to be logged in through my SDSU Gmail. So you might try logging out of your other one. So the 2 required visits, they're either with Alyssa or the Writing Center. And so you are able to make appointments with the Writing Center.
I have a question as well. Not about what kind of. Alyssa, I had a meeting with her before the first draft was due, and it was like she was super helpful. And then after the first draft was due, I had a meeting with someone from the Writing Center. And I know that in your like directions, you said that we had to have like revisions or like differences in our first and second draft, but my person in the Writing Center was like not helpful whatsoever. And like the peer editing groups, they were really helpful in the sense like nice and like, this is good. And I'm like, oh, thank you. And a tip that I got was like to have more rhetorical strategies. And I asked the girl at the Writing Center and she was like, I don't know how you would do that. And so I guess my question is, what do we do to get our like revision points if there's really nothing that we want to revise?
I haven't seen your paper yet, Faith. I'll make a point of doing that this afternoon. Every paper that I have read, and I have read about 15 papers so far, and they all have revision. I think that after I talk about revision today,
Okay.
you're going to have some ideas of things that you want to work on.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, it's not like it was a perfect essay. Like, I was reading it and I was like, there's something I could do better. I just didn't know what. And I don't know how to like insert rhetorical strategies, like with, because that's kind of an interesting way to go about things, like to write it and then afterwards, like be like, oh, well, where can I insert like personification or something, you know?
Yeah, and I think personification is probably not the best rhetorical strategy, but I'll give you some suggestions.
Okay.
This revision, or this is all about revision, and I just wanted to start with some business type things. There are some times when you will not get the feedback that you want to get. Sometimes peer reading groups, people are afraid to say things, or they're not sure what to say. This is a very, very different type of essay. And so even in the Writing Center, they might not be entirely clear what it is that you are looking for or what you need help with. And if they don't know the prompt and they're trying to give you advice, then the advice they give is not going to be helpful. And so,
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was just my person. Like, she left like 15 minutes early and I was like still asking questions and I was like, okay, bye, I guess.
okay, well, let's talk, and then we'll have a little bit of time at the end that you can ask some questions in response, Faith. Okay?
Okay.
So I want to talk about genre. And genre, you know, with music, that one type of music, I may have said this before, like marching band music is very distinct. Violin concertos are different. Electronic dance music, disco, hip hop. Each of those genres of music have distinct characteristics. And nobody is going to confuse disco with hip hop. It's just not going to happen because we know it has a different rhythm, it has different types of lyrics, it has different ways of using lyrics, and so we just know. Every style of writing is its own genre too. There's some that you're super familiar with. You probably had to write a few haikus in K-12. We will not be doing haikus in this class, but you know, it has, you know, like there are 3 lines, or is it 5 lines, and some of them have certain number of syllables and the other ones have other number of syllables, and they have certain topics, and that's a genre. And you know that a sonnet is not a haiku. You can tell the difference. 5-paragraph essay, you know, it has a distinct introduction with a straightforward thesis, 3 paragraphs, each with a support, and then a conclusion. Some of you wrote personal statements, like those college essays, and you know you were telling a story about yourself, and it was very linear, and you were building a main point, which is, this is who I am, this is what my goals are, this is why I fit into this college. Those are unique characteristics. This essay is a personal essay, and it has its own characteristics. And that's why I wanted you to read, and you read at least 3 personal essays. You read Bronson Koenig, and then you read 2 more essays. And if you think about the unique characteristics of those, is they are personal stories. Each of the authors is telling stories about themselves, but the essay itself is not about them. It's about some larger point. It's just that their stories illustrate this larger point. And I want you to think about those essays as a model for what you're doing. You're looking to match those characteristics with what you're doing. You can even use one of those essays as an organizational pattern or a suggestion for rhetorical strategies. I want to go back to Harriet McBride Johnson's statement. She says, storytelling is an activity, it's not an object. Stories are the closest we come to shared experience. When we read Bronson Koenig's story about going to Standing Rock, we see Standing Rock, we see the oppression of the indigenous people, we see the protesters, we see the threat of the land, we see him not feeling like he has a connection to his heritage. We see all of that through his eyes. It's like when we're reading that, we're riding around in his head. We're reminded that being who we are and where we are and doing what we do is not the only possibility. There's another world out there. The same thing is true. We're inside Harriet McBride Johnson's head with her in her wheelchair, experiencing, like people overlooking her, not looking at her, not considering her as an intelligent person, because that's her world. That's your goal, is you are challenging somebody else to think new thoughts by riding around in your head. Philip Lopate Bascom says reflective essayists, this is what you're doing. You're circling around, wheeling, diving like a hawk. You're not writing a typical academic essay that starts with a thesis and builds that thesis. No, you're telling stories, and the stories themselves make implicit claims. This allows for a lot of perspective. You're illuminating whatever the subject is from multiple angles. Graham says, you don't begin with a thesis because you don't have one. You just explore that topic and you walk in and see what's inside. And maybe you come up with an answer, or maybe you come up with a new question. You were a character in that, Lopate says. You can't just start by talking about yourself because your audience, the people who are reading your essay, don't know who you are. So you have to use story so that they know who you are. They know what you care about. They know your experience. It's not telling them, oh, when I was in grade school, I thought all these things. No, it's giving us a story, a distinct point in time that introduces us to you, that shows us who you are. So if you want to know what your essay should look like, it should look like these essays that you've been reading. Lots of character development. We should see you doing specific things, seeing specific things, discovering specific things, learning specific things. We should see the people around you doing specific things, interacting in specific ways. And this is not specific in a general sense. This is point in time. We see Koenig coming out of the tent, seeing the camp in the light, the thousands of campers and trailers and teepees and tents, the bent basketball. He's wandering, and we see what he's wandering. We see what he sees when he's wandering. So lots of description in the stories you've been reading, and you need to do that too. And there should be some kind of conflict, and we should see that conflict. Now, conflict isn't two people, like coming against each other, but there are obstacles that you have to overcome that allow you to learn something. Events that help you see, help show your confusion or your discovery. We should see that. And that main point that you're building, it shouldn't be matter. It should matter. It isn't just, oh, here are these values, or I have these values, but here's why these values matter, how they make a difference. Think about that. That should be your main point. Don't tell us who you are and what you did. Show us who you are and what you did. There must be a compelling opening story, a hook that pulls readers in with its description, its claims, its invitation into someone else's life, into your life. And there's a main point that challenges your readers to think in new ways, to discover new ideas, to do something different. Questions? Faith, you asked about rhetorical strategies. And I want to mention that rhetorical strategies are the way you convey your ideas. You don't just put in a rhetorical strategy to put in a rhetorical strategy. You tell your story using things like repetition, where you're repeating the same words or phrases over and over again to help you emphasize distinct ideas, force your readers to ask questions, help you develop rhythm in your words. You might use exemplification. That's an example, an illustration, a narrative that helps you make a claim. It's not telling your readers the claim, but helping them come up with the claim in their heads. Identification is a rhetorical strategy that's saying something like, I know you think this thing, and I do too. So I'm assuming you think this, and I'm showing this idea. Description allows your readers to see, feel what you, the authors, see, feel. That scene with the basketball hoop that's bent over from the wind helps us know that this is a rough land. This isn't, not all basketball hoops get bent over that way. That the river is so close to the camp, only 50 yards away, shows that Standing Rock is really close to the Missouri River. How could a pipeline not have impact on the water supply? Sometimes narration moves the story forward. Sometimes asking transitional questions moves the story forward. And don't think in terms of I'm going to use diction or syntax, because those just mean the author uses words and you all are using words. So I'm back to Harriet McBride Johnson. A lot of you analyzed this strategy. And some of you said loaded language, and I see that. Some of you said a narrative. I saw another strategy, and I want you to think about this and what you think and what you feel just after the first sentence, because this is really powerful. He insists he doesn't want to kill me. And when I read that, I just go, because, and what questions might pop in my head after the first sentence?
Why?
Yeah.
Why does somebody want to kill me? What else?
Who he is.
Yes. I mean, like, who is he and why does he want to kill me? And why does he say he doesn't? I mean, like, it's like, and when I saw this, I saw the repetition. So I highlighted, and I'm seeing that I should have, like highlighted it a little different, but he, and then down at the bottom here, his. And so far is 2 paragraphs, and we don't know who he is because she's really trying to do that. Look at all the times she says kill, kill, killing the baby, kill similar babies. And then all the personal pronouns, the I, me, I, my head, my brain. I mean, like it's creepy. It's confusing. He simply thinks it would have been better, all things considered, to have given my parents, also parents, the option of killing the baby I once was and to let other parents kill similar babies as they come along and thereby avoid the suffering that comes with lives like mine and satisfy the reasonable preferences of parents for a different kind of child. It has nothing to do with me and I should not feel threatened. Whenever I try to wrap my head around his tight string of syllogisms, my brain gets so fried, it's almost fun. Mercy, it's like Alice in Wonderland. And I highlighted that one because she alludes to Alice in Wonderland and the confusion that is Alice in Wonderland repeatedly throughout the text. What is the emotional effect of repetition in here?
I think it's like emphasizing.
It looks like you need to read a little bit more at this point.
Like it's emphasizing many of like the actions that she's talking about, so it's creating more of an emotional like attachment to her as a person and kind of personifying the things that she's talking about.
So by using this repetition and all the personal pronouns, me, he, we, and talking about how somebody wants to kill her, or at least people like her, we do get more emotionally attached to her. We want to know who she is. At this point, unless you know that she's a disability rights activist, which I did not, I just want to know why they want to kill her. Other emotions that we might feel with this. I felt confusion. It was creepy. I mean, who talks about killing babies? And she's not talking about abortion here. She's talking about killing babies. Babies who are born. And we want to know, and confusion, we want to know who he is. And so she narrows that focus with a transitional question at the end of the fourth paragraph. What does it take to be a person? And this is her propelling her idea forward. This is her narrowing her point. Because although she does talk about abortion, she's talking about disabled people and how people tend to overlook her and ignore her. And Peter Singer would say, even after she was born, it would have been fine to kill her. But not now, because she actually is a person. So what does it take to be a person? Singer's answer, awareness of your own existence in time, the capacity to harbor preferences as to the future, including the preference for continuing to live. And she refutes that by saying, you know, like, even if somebody is comatose, it's not right to take their life. Even if somebody is in a vegetative state, it is not right to take their life. So this is expanded beyond the scope of abortion. And so in telling this story, and she fills it with repetition over and over again, she's repeating those pronouns, repeating the same ideas, examining them from different perspectives over and over again. And it's a fairly long essay. She's building this argument. And this is how I wrote her argument down. See, she's telling her story, but she's not telling us, it's not just about her. So in her personal essay titled Unspeakable Conversations, published in the New York Times Magazine, disability rights activist Harriet McBride Johnson explores the common tendency to ignore or overlook the disabled and argues that people should not let prejudice against disabled people determine their value because all human life matters and disabled people are human. She's definitely digging in to that idea. Questions about the use of repetition or the argument or how she builds that argument. I want to switch to Nguyen. This is Viet Thanh Nguyen, who was a novelist and an essayist and an English professor. I don't know where. This is published in the Washington Post. And whenever we're thinking about who the audience is, we have to think, like where something was published. And because it was published in a popular newspaper, we know it's going out to a lot of different people. But who's going to read something about cannon fodder? It's a really clever title. But we might, somebody who's interested in immigration might, multicultural, universities might be interested. We know because there's a subtitle to this. And he opens with a narrative. It's a story about, like him being a first-year PhD student. In 1992, I told the English department chairman, a famous Americanist, that I wanted to write a dissertation on Vietnamese and Vietnamese American literature. You can't do that, he said, fretting over my ambition to teach in a university English department. You won't get a job. Since even my Marxist mentor agreed with the chair, I took the safer route and wrote a dissertation on Asian American literature, a subject in which some people had gotten tenure-track professorial positions. And all of you who wrote about this identified it as a narrative, and some of you said it's helping him build ethos, which it is indeed, because instead of telling us that he's a PhD student studying English at the very respectable University Berkeley, all of which builds ethos, he adds this narrative. But this narrative is doing something. It's an example of exemplification. That's a little redundant. Exemplification is providing an example that builds and supports an implicit claim. An implicit claim is one that the author doesn't come out and state, like upfront, like we would see in an academic essay, but it's an idea, it's an example that illustrates a point. What claim is Nguyen making with this opening paragraph? Okay. He's making the claim that it's not okay to study multicultural history or multicultural literature if you are in an English department and you want to teach. It's not respected, it's not valued. And it's not respected even at Berkeley, which is known for being very liberal, and even Nguyen's Marxist mentor agrees it's not respected enough to help this man get a job at a major university. That's his claim. And by providing an example to support that, he's making that claim. And his next paragraph provides a second example. Still, this was not an easy path, as a scholar of Chicano literature told me, with a note of anger in his voice. We have to read their literature, but they don't have to read ours. He meant that we in the minority would always have to know what the minds of the majority of favor the majority knew it did not have to return. Knowledge of this kind was meant for survival for the minority. Ignorance of this kind was an expression of privilege for the majority. A little bit of repetition in there. And he's building this claim. Multicultural literature is not respected. If people who are people of color want to read it, that's fine. But the majority, those white people, never have to do that. And they are ignorant of that privilege. And by providing these examples, he's able to make this claim. And his audience of people who read the Washington Post is going to say, if they are people of color, they're going to say, oh yeah, that's totally true. And if they're white people, they're going to say, oh, I never thought of that. They may not have even recognized that they were not reading multicultural literature, that everything they read was from white men. I know when I was an English major in the 80s, I didn't realize that. Even as a woman, I didn't recognize that I wasn't reading works by women. Everything was from white men. And I didn't realize that. And so by providing two examples, he sets up his argument where he begins to explore why that's the case and why it needs to change. His argument, he discusses the debate over which literary texts students should study and argues that white people and people of color will gain more by expanding the canon than limiting it to traditional texts like Shakespeare. You'll see when I'm marking your papers, and I'll mark a few more this afternoon and this evening, and after that I'll only start marking the ones that come in second drafts. Starting with a distinct story allows you to make a claim. It allows you to set a tone. It invites your readers in so they know you and they know where this essay is headed. McBride does that too with a narrative. Only this one is a narrative that didn't actually happen. It's purely hypothetical. It is his nightmare, but it is a narrative. And this one, excuse me. And this one is, we could say it was identification, it was description, it's loaded language. He says, this is my nightmare. My daughter comes home with a guy and says, Dad, we're getting married. That's enough shock for dads. But he adds this, and he's a rapper with a mouthful of gold teeth, a do-rag on his head, muscles popping out his arms, and a thug attitude. And this is loaded language that appeals to most of you who analyzed this one. You noted that it's National Geographic. It's probably mostly white people. He is appealing to every stereotype of rappers and hip hoppers. And these, so stereotypes, racial stereotypes, racism, and it makes people go, it makes his readers say, oh my gosh, yes, that's what rappers are like. They are all gangbangers and they're scary. And then identification, because McBride is basically saying, this is my attitude, and I know this is your attitude too. We agree. We're the same. And so that helps him, by appealing to their stereotypes and evoking that fear of Black hip hoppers, he's showing that he's like them, even though he's a Black man. And then the nightmare gets deeper, because before you know it, I'm hearing the pitter patter of little feet, their osprey, cascading through my living room, cascading through my life, drowning me with the sound of my own hypocrisy. Because when I was young, I was a knucklehead too, hearing my own music, my own sounds. And I'm telling you, every teenager has their own type of music. And their parents and older people almost always think that it's horrible. And so he had that. His parents thought he was, his music wasn't good, and now he thinks his daughter's music isn't good. And he realizes his hypocrisy, and he realizes to his horror that rap, music seemingly without melody, sensibility, instruments, verse, or harmony, music with no beginning, end, or middle, music that doesn't even seem to be music, it rules the world. Because he lives in a hip hop planet. And what does that mean? Again, he's identifying with his audience's attitudes. And by doing that, he says, yes, I saw that too, but now I realize something new. Hip hop rules the world. And he goes on to show, to describe the origins and development of hip hop, and to argue that this music reflects racist oppression and poverty. And he argues that this music reflects racist oppression and poverty, and privileged people should pay attention to the message and develop equitable solutions. So by identifying with them early on, he makes it safe for him to then do this cultural exploration that allows him to build this very subversive argument. Questions? You all are very quiet. You'll notice that every time I wrote out an argument, it had a so what, why does it matter? It isn't just hip hop rules the world, but it has this message and people should pay attention and make changes. White people will benefit from reading multicultural education. All of this has an argument that matters. And the purpose of your essay isn't just to tell your story. This isn't about you. You have to think about why your story matters and what relevant main point you're building toward. You're discovering something through your story that matters to you, but it also matters to your audience of first-year students. As you're writing, think in terms of actions that show and don't just tell, distinct moments, points in time that you can put us in that moment, seeing what you see. Honestly, you're not going to remember everything about some really momentous point in time when you're 8 years old. You'll remember some things, but you're going to have to re-remember in order to pull out concrete details. So it's going to be a collection of memories, and you're going to have to build it so that your audience can be there with you experiencing this. You need to think about what parts of your identity matter. Remember, you're writing to first-year students at SDSU. Does the fact that you're an SDSU student matter? Does where you came from matter? Does your extracurriculars in high school, does that matter? Does your race, your experiences, your culture, your socioeconomic status, does it matter? What matters to your audience and what matters to your story? You want to weave those in, not by telling us who you are, but by showing it in your story. Who matters to your story? What do we know about them? Where are you in your story? It mattered that Koenig was at Standing Rock. It mattered that we could see it with him. playing basketball on dirt. I mean, like, this is intense, but we see this in the moment, him being surprised. We see it through his eyes. Your title matters. Is it engaging? Does it hint at what has come? Does it make people want to read? Hip Hop Planet, a lot of you chose it just because of the title. Or How to Tame a Wild Tongue, you chose it because of the title. Give us a title that hints at what's to come without being so explicit. Here's one you didn't read, Joyous Survival, the literacy of the hillside strangler, and anything extra we know. And you're probably thinking, what? There's a literacy of the hillside strangler? Her title is shocking and powerful, and it matters. Think of the organization. Very few of these essays that we read went in chronological order from the time somebody was a baby to the time that they're this moment in time where they are now. What they did is start somewhere, some memory, and then they flash back to other memories and forward to others. Look at how they organize. I'm telling you, if you're not sure what to do, choose one of these essays as a model to help guide you. It's not going to be linear. Fundamentally, an essay is a train of thought, Graham says. It's cleaned up train of thought, just like dialogue is cleaned up conversation. It's missing all the ums and the or likes. So real thought, like real conversation, is full of false starts. It would be exhausting to read. So you need to cut and fill to emphasize the central thread. So once you've figured out what you're saying, now you're thinking about where you can jumble everything. Not something you read looking for a specific answer and feel cheated if you don't find it. It might just end up asking questions at the end. So this is all I have. I have 10 minutes before I have to go into the writing center. And so that means I have 10 minutes to answer your questions. If you want to go, I've given you enough to think about. You can just log out and have a great weekend of writing and reading. And but if you've got questions, let's talk about them.
Professor, I had a question.
Yeah, Ariana.
So I wrote my story in chronological order because I felt like the turning point was in chronological order, at least for the part that I felt like hit the hardest to like move, like transition into, I guess, the point of the essay, like start to transition into the conclusion. Should I try to rearrange it to not make it chronological, or?
So that pivotal point, that's where it starts getting exciting. How exciting is it at the beginning?
It's more objective in the beginning, but I could see why you said like to start with more narrative too, because I also think that that's something I should incorporate, just because I feel like it's not a very good like hook right now.
So think of a hook. Okay, so yeah, Wynn does not start with the present. He starts with a story from the past. But it isn't the story of, like him being in high school, or him, like he alludes to his parents and how they sacrificed for him as immigrants and how disappointed they were that he was an English major. But it doesn't start there. It starts at this moment where he's having to make some choices. McBride Johnson, she has this really quizzical, confusing reflection that's inside out, sort of an Alice in Wonderland type of narrative that pulls her readers in. McBride starts with hypothetical. We see Koenig starting at Standing Rock, but even at Standing Rock, he's reflecting on his childhood. Like how he grew up in the city and didn't know anything. That's the first point we know that he's Ho Chunk. is like, I went to reservations, but like I was more interested in basketball. So think about how you can pull your readers in. Like, what point in your storyline could you go there and then reflect back on anything that was needed?
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question just regarding like the revision. So do you want us to turn in a new document?
That's really up to you, Sophia. As a writer, I think I would want to turn in a new document because I think all the comments on the side would be confusing to me. If it's not confusing to you, it's fine. I will be fine either way. So you think about what works well for you.
So what if like we didn't change that much? Like I added maybe 3 sentences here and there. Is that all we needed to do?
I would suggest that this lecture today probably gave you a better idea of what I'm looking for. And did you think of things that might be better if you revised them after today?
Yeah.
Then if you have time to do that between now and tomorrow when it's due, I would encourage you to do that. I'm not counting what you changed, but the reason why I'm giving 3 weeks for drafting this and 2 revisions is, like a first draft, a second draft, and then a final draft, is to allow you to do that really deep work of revision and reorganization and development.
Okay, and then also question for the homework that was like supposed to be due today, but we're doing next week. So just as long as it's in by Monday, that's fine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you, Sophia. Other questions?
I actually have a question.
Yeah, Regine.
For the works cited page that's also due with the journal, what is this? What are the citations on? Is it on?
Is
it on?
Teresa Tony's article.
Okay, so are we just citing her article, or is it stuff that we use that are within her article as well?
Whenever you're citing, you're only citing the article that you actually used. So unless you accessed any of her sources, then you're not going to put those on your works cited.
Okay, so we're fine to at least quote from her article, but really it's just her article that we're citing?
Yeah, because you're only quoting from her article. She's quoting other people, but you're just quoting her article.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I guess this goes back to what I said earlier, that I don't really know what to say. But I don't want points taken off, because the only thing that I really feel like could use that I'm like unhappy with is my last paragraph, like the ending. But I don't know what to do with it. Like, I don't know how I want to end it. And like, no one knows my story, so it's not like they can tell me how to end it either.
So does it have a compelling hook at the beginning?
Alyssa said that she really liked the beginning, and that she liked that like throughout throughout the essay, like she said that I had like she could tell that I had like my own like writing voice in it. And like I do have those rhetorical strategies that you mentioned. Like, I mean, I didn't do it on purpose. I was just like, that's how I thought the story, and that's just how I typed it out, And I don't know how to write it other than just like think my thoughts and put it on paper.
So Faith, I'm not going to be comparing your first draft and your last draft, but I will note that E.B. White did over 50 renditions of Charlotte's Web.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really, really good writer.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage you to go over it, read it aloud, and think about, like, what are some things that you could ways you could tighten up sentences, what details are extraneous that aren't needed, what kind of questions might people have as they read. Are you asking the how, why questions? Are there places where people might be confused, where they might not understand what you were talking about? When I meet with a student, I can't cover all the things that I might want to touch on because I know that I'm going to cover them incrementally with students, that they're not going to, if I tell them everything I'm thinking, that they're going to be overwhelmed. What I can tell you is it's unlikely that I'm going to get to your first draft. It's more likely that I'll see your second draft and then you'll see my comments on that, which is probably what you're most interested in, because we can say it's for an audience, but you're very aware that I'm giving you a grade, and that's okay. It's hard to move beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, of course, I know there's things that I can do. I guess it's more of like writer's block at this point because I don't know, I really tried to like perfect it and like I kind of lost my ideas for it. So
yeah, I totally get that. I am the type of person who does, I revise as I go. So I write, revise, get stuck, revise, and then I circle back. And so by the time I get to an end draft, like the end of writing it, I'm kind of like you are, where I'm going, I don't know how to, I don't know how to close it. And I've done the revisions, but I've done them as I was writing. And I don't know if that's something that you do also.
Yeah, I do that the same way. And usually like I'll start with one idea and by the time I'm halfway through, I have like another one that I want to implement but yeah, I'll do another writing center appointment too. I think that person just didn't help me that much. So, but
do you remember who you met with?
I know her name was Vanessa. I mean, she was super nice, but I just don't think she really understood the prompt.
That's a possibility. I would suggest there's a few people who I think would really challenge you. Chris works nights. He works, what nights does he work? Tuesday and Thursday. So Tuesday evening and Thursday afternoon, Chris works. And he's worked with my students on personal essays before. And you can tell him things like, yeah, my teacher says I probably need a revision. I don't know, wait until I've given you some feedback. And then you'll know what to ask going in. Because right now you're happy with your essay. And so I'll take a look at it and I'll give you some suggestions. And you can take my suggestions or not, but at least it'll guide you when you go into the Writing Center.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Faith. Have a really good afternoon.
You too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.